Hey, I'm Mike Mylan, and that's Blaine Birch, and this is another episode of Nobody Told Me. And today we're going to talk about planning. And believe it or not, as Patton, General George S. Patton said, planning is everything, but the plan is nothing. Now, do you know what I'm talking about?
I am, yeah, I can kind of wrap my head around a little bit, but as we start chatting here, it'll start to come clear because I get the concept of it. I get the idea. It's sort of like the best laid plan, right? Just you deviate immediately, right?
Well, and if I'm going back to my military roots, but speaking of military, how about this?
Oh yeah,
You
what are you
remember?
drinking today?
Hey, do you remember how last week I broke ranks and did my first California beer because I didn't stay in Texan? Well, this is overcompensating. Independence Brewery out of Austin, Texas. I got the native Texan Pilsner is what I'm going to go with today. But look at this thing. It's the Texas flag wrapped.
Oh, beautiful.
Wraps the can.
That's
That's a
awesome.
really cool. Yeah, that's a really cool can. So I'm going to have the native Texan today. How about you?
Nice. Well, I went outside of Alberta today. Numbskull, which has got this really cool hop skull
Yeah, check that out.
artwork, which
Yeah.
is so badass. And it's from Lighthouse Brewing in Victoria, BC. So it's Canadian. It is a terrific beer. Like I'm really enjoying it. It's an Imperial IPA, double IPA. So it's a pretty heavy beer. So well, um, it'll loosen my tongue, I think, today. So that's good. But yeah, no, it's a terrific beer. And then I just thought it was such a cool, like a bit like you. Sometimes I see a cool can, I'm like, oh man, that I'm
Yeah.
all over that one. And
Yeah.
and it turns out to be a fantastic beer. So
And they call it Numbskull, and it's a big hop head. I mean, it
big
looks like
hophead
a
skull.
flaming, yes, flaming skull.
Yeah.
What was the name of that movie with Nicolas Cage? Wasn't that
Oh
didn't
yeah.
his whole head catch fire?
Hell, was it Hell Rider or something, or
Something
something
Rider,
Rider,
yeah.
something Rider. Yeah, his whole head's on fire. It looks like
That's what it reminds me of. Yeah, that's what it
Nice.
reminds me of. Well, very cool. All right, so here's what I think it means. All right, so going back to military, uh, there's a German. I'm going to say general, but the title was like Kaiser. It's like Kaiser Wilhelm had a saying, and the saying was this: that no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. Have you ever heard that?
I have heard it. I didn't know it was him, but I have heard the phrase before.
Yeah, and what he meant by that is, I mean, the best laid plans, like you were saying. I mean, we can go through and we can war game every scenario. We can go through and plan for every contingency. But as soon as that plan hits real life, you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to change. You're going to have to be agile, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's the startup life. That's not only the startup
yeah.
life, but I'm sure there's been times where you've had to adjust where your expectation of reality and what was really happening just didn't match.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't minimize the importance of a plan. Like you have to have the foundation there, because if you don't, you're not going to succeed at all. But yeah, it changes immediately. Almost nothing ever runs perfectly as planned. Virtually never. And sometimes it'll actually work better. But most of the time, you just get a bunch of friction and problems and tricky parts that you gotta overcome, right?
Yeah, so I'm an over planner, right? I like to visualize. I mean, I start off really with a big grand idea, and I'll lean back on the military. I guess I'm doing that today. Uh, they used or taught me a technique called the backwards planning technique, right? And you start with an end state. You start with a goal
Yeah.
at a specific time, right? It's a specific event that's going to occur on a specific day. And then you pick milestones of what should happen all along that path, right? And then that's kind of how you build the outlines, like going, okay,
Yeah.
well, January 1st, I want to launch this new product. What's going to happen between now and January 1st for that to be successful, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
where it all starts. I mean, how do you get your plan started? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, we do like a lot of planning, and it's one of the things that we know is so important. The reason we do it is because it helps bring the focus of priorities, and it helps really bring that focus into how you're going to make that next step and that next step. So we have plans with not only with, like, we have one side that's sort of like the product development plans, and it generally is, it's fed from our sales and marketing side, and like how are we going to build the product out with a goal in mind that actually is going to help us grow, help our sales, help us accelerate. And so, yeah, like we will do like, of course, financial goals, but we'll also have product goals. We'll have, number of partner goals. We'll have all the key metrics we will have a goal for, and then we'll try and work our way back and prioritize. That is one of the keys, especially with a startup. You always have not enough time, not enough people. There's only so many hours in the day. You have to be so strategic to go, we're going to prioritize this one thing and we are going to nail it. And then as soon as you start moving, you shift a bit because you find out, okay, well, but I find because you have that good plan in place, the shifts are small. You're not flailing wildly, throwing anything at the wall. You're going, okay, yeah, no, we've got a little more info here. We just got to move it over to here. We got to move it a few degrees to the left, to the right, up, down, whatever.
Yeah. So when you're talking about that, I mean, it reminds me of, kind of some things that I have to put in place, right? When I got this end state, I want to do X, whatever it is. Maybe start a business, maybe that's what it is. I always start though with 2 to 5, what I call strategic pillars, which means this is who we are. It's defining who we are and what are the things that we count on as absolute truths. Because if you don't have any pillars, then you're really not going to be able to build towards your goal. And what I mean by that is, let's just take one of my restaurants. I'm just going to use that as an example.
Sure.
So in one of my restaurants, one of the first questions I had to answer was, am I a bar with a restaurant, or am I a restaurant with a bar? Because then other decisions, and this is what I mean strategic pillar, is when you understand the pillars, it guides you to more answers more quickly, right? So if I say I'm a bar with a restaurant, then you have an expectation as a customer that when you walk in, you're like, oh, they present themselves as a bar, they advertise as a bar. I expect a different experience than if I said I was a restaurant that just has a little bar in the back. Right. Yes. I mean, so I mean that's an example. So I mean, what are some what I call them strategic pillars? I mean, what do you call them?
Yeah, well, I don't know if we it makes perfect sense what we're saying. We basically have to follow the same thing. Like when we're looking right now, I think I went back to one of our conversations we had. I don't remember if it was the last podcast or one before. We started talking about finding your niche. And it's a little bit of that same thing, is that we can't be everything to everybody. We have to find our niche. What are we the best in the world at? And where are we prioritizing? Where are we focusing? But where are we narrowing down, sometimes really uncomfortably narrow, to go, this is where we have to go. And then you start getting that feedback and you start learning, and it can adjust that. So that's what I found is I kind of like, we could say like, hey, this is one of our pillars. This is what we're going to do. And then the market tells me, yeah, you know what? You're actually really good at this other thing. It's just a little off. All right, our strategic pillar just moved a little bit, but you have to recognize it and know it, and be flexible enough to say, like it's not like I am, this is what we are, and hell or high water, we're following this. The market dictates a lot of that. So you have to be open to that feedback, and seeing that opportunity, and then making those little bit of adjustments, because it's partly how do they see us, how do we see us, might not be a perfect match. In fact, as a startup early on, it probably isn't. That's why they always say finding that product market fit is so hard, but so critical, because it's kind of from us, but it's also from the market. And you're reading the market and you're going, where? Oh, that's where we are.
Yeah. All right. So, and the reason why I wanted to do this topic is, again, I'm in the middle of helping build another company, but I spent 16 years in the Army, the National Guard, there in Missouri, as an Army officer. I mean, I commanded companies, built large plants, and it reminded me of a story of like, have you ever looked at how like the Russians fight a war? Have you ever thought about what they do?
Well, I don't know sort of overall. I have read a lot of history books, so I know how they how they dealt with the Eastern Front in like World War II, and how they the sort of slash and burn, and they, all of that. I remember reading some about that, but I suspect you probably are at a much higher understanding than me.
Well, all right. So the basic premise around their offensive is echelon after echelon. It's wave upon wave. It's the same way the Chinese fight as well. It's wave upon wave. And what happens is once they hit resistance, it's wave, 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 and then they'll flank somebody, right or left. So that's kind of what you can prepare for. One of the top Russian generals back in about the 80s, 90s made a statement that kind of stuck with me when he said, what makes the United States so hard to fight is that the individual ground commander has control. He can change the plan as anything around him changes, where it's not the same in what we'll say, it perceived. I don't really know. I've never been part of the Russian army, but perceived as, no, we have a plan. You stick to the plan, right? I mean, even if it's 10,000 people got to go against the same wall, that's what we're going to do. That's the plan. Well, a United States military officer might go, yeah, they ain't working, but look over here, there's a crack. And they can change the plan on a second. Well, that's the same type of decision making and planning that I've brought into business, which means that as you're seeing things, and what they teach you is the tenets of the offense and tenets of the defense. That's where I came up with strategic pillars. Like, these are things that we kind of live by, but we can do anything we want to as long as we're kind of living by these tenets, these pillars, right? So with that in mind, I mean, the most critical thing you can give your team members so they can do the same thing, make adjustments, without you having to see everything that's happening, in your business, is give them what the Army calls the commander's intent. The commander's intent is just saying, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do this. And when you tell them that, hey, we're trying to deliver, a cash flow forecasting product that does X, Y, and Z. When you tell them that, as they're developing their plans, as they're making things happen and run into obstacles, they can make quick adjustments because they know what the intent is, right? So I think that's a critical component in planning, is give some people your intent to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we adopted, it's a really famous system, the OKR system, objective and key results systems, to bring some sort of focus and priorities into our team. Because again, we're a small team. We have to be very surgical on what we do. We have to be very focused. But what's interesting is it's focusing on, like, highly focused, but it's on the result, like on the key results. So you have to figure out, okay, how are you going to do it? What are you going to execute to get to that result? But you're focused on the result, which means it's not, we're just going to, like, kind of like you said, like, you're not just following blindly because that's the plan and hell or high water. No, at some point you go, that's not going to deliver the result. We're starting to get that data back. We're starting to get that test data back.
Exactly.
It's not working. We got to shift it a bit because we want to reach this key result. And the key result is not, it's like you're going from that key vision or the big vision all the way down. The key results are short-term, measurable. We need to get to here. And so that you're doing it in bite-sized chunks, but you have that flexibility to go, yeah, if it's not working, keep in mind, you're trying to get from A to B, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's super cool, because that provides everybody with the agility and the confidence to go, yeah, it's not going to work. He wants me to do this, and if I continue on this path, we're sunk. And you go, but that also, assumes that they have a little forethought.
Yes.
Right. That they can see a trap. They can see, the pitfall. They can see the obstacle in the way. So I mean, and that's a hard skill to know, right? I would think.
It's interesting because that's, we don't talk about like our product that much, but that's like, we literally called our product Dry Run because it's doing a dry run and testing something out and trying to get that information and see, model these different scenarios, but see it far enough out so you can go, I'm going to adapt to that. I'm going to adjust to that. And that comes from my experience. I've talked before about my last business as a creative agency. That's where a lot of that discipline came from, because you would lay out we would have our sales forecast, we have our team, we have our plans. And it never rolled out quite the way you expected. But you're always trying to look forward. And for us, we're always looking, okay, is our pipeline full enough? Is it too full? Because you could get so easily into the feast and famine where you would have like way too much work because you closed it all at once, and the team would be overwhelmed, and your profit margins getting eaten up if you're doing contractors or overtime. And then inevitably you wouldn't be keeping that sales momentum up, and then you're going to get that trough. And now you have your people sitting idle, but you're paying them, eating up your profit margin. And so if you saw that far enough out, you could lay out the plan. I want to make X amount of dollars this quarter. I want to make X amount of dollars this year. How do we do it? But these troughs, these peaks and valleys would affect that. But when you're looking far enough out and you're predicting what that sales pipeline is going to look like, what would happen is you could start to go, oh, we're going to get overwhelmed here. You know what, early enough, you can start going to the clients we negotiate. We go, I know these guys don't need it right away. So we can even give them a slight cost differential, or we can negotiate with them to start later, and you can smooth those things out. So it's this constant adjustment. The key is you have to have the data. You have to have the information. If you don't, you can't make any of those decisions. It's just constantly hitting you in the face. And you're going, oh, we're overwhelmed again. Oh, we're slow again. Oh, we're overwhelmed again. You have to somehow have that information that allows you to adjust on the fly, but it's still to reach that end goal, right?
Yeah. What was really cool is you mentioned pipelines. And I'll tell you what, 20 years ago, I didn't pay that much attention to it. You're like, oh, if I knock on enough doors, I'll have enough business. That's kind of was my pipeline. But anymore, especially with digital sales, it's so critical because first of all, you got to plan it. Here are the things. I've got some top of the funnel activities. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's paid advertising, maybe there's some outreach, maybe the conferences, whatever that is. But then there's a couple of other layers. And the reason why you want to separate those out is because you can see where the blocks are. You can see, where you need to focus attention. That's one of the reasons I love the sales funnel and the way it lays out so well, because once you get enough data into it, you know exactly where to focus your time and energy and resources. So if you're agile and surgical like you are, that's pinpointing the problem every single time.
Yeah. And it's you have to do that in business, and it's never more than now, because businesses are like, during the pandemic here, so many businesses were just hit so hard. So they have zero room to move. You have to be surgical because there's no wiggle room. But some businesses, because of the pandemic, are knocking it out of the park. They're growing so fast that they're almost out of control. Same problem. You have to know where you're going. You have to be surgical because you have to be able to adjust to that rapid growth, which can kill you as fast as anything. But you also have to keep predicting, because how long is this going to go? Yeah. Is it indefinite, or as things open up, are you going to start, scaling back? And are you going to be able to predict that soon enough to make those adjustments? So it's absolutely critical that you have that data and you're adjusting to it and you're being smart. And even then it's hard, right? So flying in the dark is a recipe for disaster.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why, especially with that sales funnel, I love the backwards planning technique, because you can say, hey, what does it really take me to get one customer? Well, let's just say that that's 1 out of 10 people buy. Well, that means I got to have 10 people get in the product, right? Yeah. And then how many people have to come to the landing page to get into the product, right? And then how many people have to get to the landing page to go to the form to get into the product, to buy, right? It's like the 4 steps, and it's so clear once you start to understand those numbers. And here's the cool part about that is you can start to hold people accountable when you see it happening. If I put 1,000 people on the landing page, 400 of them will fill out the form or, do a trial, and 100 of them will buy. That, so I know what to hold you accountable to.
Yeah, exactly. Those would be ridiculously awesome numbers, by the way.
Yeah, well, I was gonna make up a struggle.
Yeah. Like, man, that'd be awesome. Tell me how to do that. I just don't want people at home going, holy shit, is that the numbers those guys are getting? No, it's harder than that. a little tricky.
No, yeah, you're going to start off with maybe 100,000.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
So
But
it's funny. So
it's never been more important, I think, to have data at your fingertips, because so many businesses, like businesses that never would have considered this, are now, if they're not global, they're maybe competing nationally. They're maybe competing, across the continent. Like competition is getting trickier for so many areas. Even if you're local, you could be competing. The neighborhood bar. You're not just competing against the other bar down the street. You're probably competing against, alcohol delivery services, right? Like there's other competition now.
You could be competing with just my deck.
That's exactly it.
I mean, you're trying to get me off of my deck and my patio with my group of friends down to your bar. I mean,
yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly right. So, hey, all right. So let's talk about that planning process. Sure. I always go with a rule, right? And it's probably a weird rule, but if I have a year to do something, we'll say, or it doesn't matter. Excuse me, it doesn't matter the time frame. I always look at it as a 1/3, 2/3 rule, which means I take a third of the time for myself to get my mind around it, to understand it, to lay out enough detail that I can give it to a team for the actual build, the execution, all that on a 2/3. So if I can shorten 1/3, it's even better, but I try not to exceed 1/3 of the total time available. I mean, do you have something like that you use?
That's interesting. I've never really considered it that way. Like I that's something that, like, I actually have to wrap my head around, because it sounds like a good sort of process that you're putting these sort of timeframes on it. Like I'll admit I'm probably a little bit more, like, we try and be even, like, let's say on our dev cycle, because that's the one place where you're doing that innovation stuff. So you really have to think about that next sprint. And so even earlier today, I was talking with my co-founder about sprint right now, the next sprint, most importantly, the one that's starting about 3 weeks from now, because I know we need a fair bit of information for him to do that. And, I've been thinking about it and talking about it over the last month. So I tend to start early on these things, but I also know that we have this deadline of when he's getting going in the sprint. We have to have made some of these decisions and really focus down some of these things. And I need some team input for that. So we've got kind of 3 weeks to come up with some of this information, really nail some of this down, circle him in, of course, because we have to figure out, okay, what's actually feasible and all these things, so that when we get to the sprint, he's ready to roll. So I like to have those things done in advance, and I like to have them with enough time that you're sleeping on them. So it's almost like the second we come up with an idea, it's almost like I tend to rough things out. I tend to mock things up fairly early and fairly quickly, so that I can go back a week later and a week and actually go, okay, does this make sense? Has it sort of stand the test of time? Not the overnight test, the 2-3 week test sort of thing. And the team looking at it test and kind of ripping it apart a bit test. And does it, and really vetting, does it meet our like actual bigger goals, right? Or is it a bit of a pet project? Is it an edge case, right? So,
yeah.
But what we don't have that. I haven't thought of sort of splitting it up in the like a kind of a 1/3, 2/3 like you. That's an interesting approach.
Well, the reason I do that is because it helps me. I can plan out whole feature sets and see how it fits in. And that way, when I deliver the project, and I may do the same thing as you, where I'm kind of teasing it. Hey, I'm thinking this, I'm thinking that. But when I, bring everybody into the room for a meeting and I outline all the scope of the project, I've taken a lot of time prior to that saying, hey, boom, here's the next piece, and here's how it fits into what we've already done, and here's what it may fit in next, and I'd be working on the next piece out in front of them while they're building the first one. So, hey, we're talking software and stuff like that build now. Are you guys what they consider an agile shop?
Yes.
Yeah, right. I mean, so you scrum every day, or
Yeah, we've got different different processes in place, different timing for different meetings. There's we have like we have our daily stand up, we have our OKR meetings every week. We have, and then on the dev side, like of course my co-founder can speak much more to that, but the way we set up those sprints, they tend to be rapid sprint release, you know, and the rest of the team is kind of involved in what's going to happen in the sprint and how it's going to be released and messaged to and marketed and all of that. So it's but it's a little bite size. It's, you know, we're not doing, you know, like the old software methodology of let's build for a year and do this grand release. No,
yeah.
it's tends to be 1 to 2 week sprints for us.
Okay.
The shorter we like it shorter if we can, but it's sometimes we can't, right?
Yeah, we've always tried to do, you know, hot fixes within the week, and then, you know, anything like well, most major feature sets are on a 2-week sprint. You know, what can we get done in the next 2 weeks? So yeah. So, I mean, that's pretty standard, I think. So
yeah, and the odd time, like I'll be honest, when you have something that's every once in a while, it's not very often, a few times a year, where you have a big lift where there's too much packaged together and you have to release it at once, and it's like a 3 or 4 week sprint. It is absolutely painful for everybody, because you want to keep that momentum up, and sometimes it's not feasible, but generally we aim for that just like 1 to 2 week sprints, right? And it's interesting, like, and this is something I'm sort of curious about with you, like my role, I guess, is as, you know, like my role in the company CEO, but I kind of lead the product sort of, I guess, the innovation side, or connecting with the clients. Like I'm kind of that conduit to what are the problems they have and how are we going to solve it sort of idea. And I tend to be a very much a big picture and longer term and a little probably outside of the box at times thinker. And it can be, I think it can sometimes be a challenge for the team when some of the team is very much, they're much more like, they're very, like they're excellent at those execution and objectives. And that's always, I always find that a little bit of a challenge. It's easier in the middle, but when you have the kind of extremes, and I tend to be probably a little bit more on the big picture, long-term view, vision side of sort of translating that down. Because sometimes it's like I said, I like to have enough time for people to sleep on things and view things and see how it fits in. And I think at times it's like, here's what I'm thinking. And it's like, what, you know, we're doing this over here. Yeah, no, don't worry about it. We're a month down the road on this, but it's sometimes I find it a challenge to deal with that. Right.
Well, and you know, what you've described is the exact position I've been in for the last, you know, we'll say 10 years, is that role, even though I've never had that formal title of what they call product owner. And the product owner is the one that connects the market to the development and can translate, not necessarily, I won't say I'm fluent in programming, and I won't say I'm fluent in accounting, you know, but I can translate the intent of both, right? And what the limitations are to both people, and try to make that connection. And what the formula I use, because it seems like that's my thing today, is I'm saying formulas and rules, and but the formula I use is, you know, I need a task and a purpose. We're doing this for this reason. And when you do that, people tend to get it. They can rally around you a little bit better and go, oh yeah, okay, we're doing this for this reason, and they build towards the reason, which is the commander's intent again.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that there was, I know early on in our like sort of product life cycle, we weren't as disciplined on. We knew the reason, but the reason wasn't necessarily the one as a startup should be focused on. And we've changed our, like, especially over the last year or two, we've changed our approach quite a bit to the big acid test is often, is it going to is it going to drive our growth? Does it help us build as a company, grow faster, reach more of the market? because I think at times we as, product developers and everything, was always like, wow, we see this problem, let's solve it for them, let's solve it for them, let's solve it for them. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Oftentimes, and we could get into the that's maybe a bit of a nice to have, but it was a kind of a nice to have for people that are already paying us.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was a bit more of a discipline to look at it and say, yeah, but you know what we're missing is we spent a bunch of time on a nice to have the people who are already paying us. What we've missed out is a must have for a bunch of people that are dying for us. And it was a little bit of a different mentality. And as soon as we started to do that, that really helped a lot to be able to go. And it wasn't this fanatic about just making more money. No, it was more about, are we solving really serious problems? Are we solving they always say the vitamin to the painkiller kind of thing, right? And that's something that we really try and use as a bit of a focus point.
I mean, that is so true. And I tell you, I learned a ton from James Walter, who's the CEO of Finagraph. Prior to starting Finagraph, he was a program manager at Microsoft, right? And he worked on, a product you might know called like Xbox. Right? So, but what he said was, they ran into, and he brought that same mentality to Finagraph, that we can do anything. We have the resources. We can do anything we want to. We can just make the best thing ever in the world, right? That's how HoloLens and all this new stuff that's coming out is working. But he goes, the biggest question you have to answer, and this provides the focus, is, does it drive sales? If I put this in, how many more sales will I get? How many more new customers will I get? Or our old customers, will our old customers pay more because we did X, Y, and Z? So I think that's really critical that you put that out there. Does it drive revenue?
Yeah. And it's and I think, like, I look at it as, it's not just about making money. It's that is the chief barometer. That is the chief measuring stick that tells you your clients actually value what you're doing. So it's there's definitely, it's like, we have to grow as a company. We have to grow fast. There's all of those sorts of factors, but it is so much more of bringing discipline into saying, are we offering true value to the customer? True value enough that they're willing to pay for it? Because there's nothing kind of that says more than their willingness to pay for something, their willingness to, there's engagement and there's all of these other things, but man, if you're not willing to pay, that's the ultimate, your customer is the ultimate decider. Yeah. We just have to be disciplined enough to remember that they can say no. There's nothing you can do about it. Right.
Yeah, so that becomes a marketing function in my mind, which is, okay, we have this new product feature, we got this new direction we want to go with the product. You got to send it back out to marketing and say, if we did that, would more people buy it? Would our current customers pay us more? Would it, they've got to be able to answer that question. You can only do that by talking to the customer or talking to people that know about it and finding it out.
Well, and I think that brings in a really important point, that that success comes from having input from your entire team, and it can't be isolated, because I think that's a really colossal problem with especially some software companies, where it's like the dev team just kind of goes off on their own, or their little silos, where you need that input. You have to have that customer input, and that means that you have to be talking with client success and sales and marketing, and everyone has to have their they can all offer information because they're seeing different things. Marketing seeing what's happening. Are people reacting to different messaging? Are they flowing through the funnel? And sales are talking directly with them and seeing how engaged are they, and are they really excited about this? And successes, are they onboarding, and is it working? And I think you have to have, not on everything, like, you can't afford to have everybody talking all the time, but you have to have these little points where you go, I need a little input from everybody. This is what we're doing. How's it going to affect you and you? And we actually did I'd forgot about this. We did we had these little brainstorming sessions that we would schedule and work our way through. And one of the times I thought one of the advancements that helped it work the best was it wasn't just this sort of free for all brainstorming. It was a little more disciplined of how would this affect your department, your role? It's not just a brainstorm, do whatever you want. No, how would this affect marketing? How would this affect client success? How would this affect sales? How would this affect dev? How would this, that actually helped focus it from this just random free flow thing to, I thought very much more pinpointed and much more, it reminds me a little bit. Years ago, I used to teach at the university here. I used to teach design classes just on, while I was running, not necessarily the smartest thing, but while I was running the business, I was teaching a couple times a week, a couple afternoons a week or whatever. And really enjoyed that time. But one of the things I found that the biggest struggle students would have is if you left a project that was too open. You wouldn't get innovation then because they didn't really know what to do.
Yeah.
You start to bring these guys, you just start focusing it down, and it's almost like, yeah, you're going to have to do this, and it's going to be really, really constricted. That's where innovation happens, because then they can start going, let's start thinking outside of the box of solving this problem. And you had to have that focus for them to be able to bring it into context and think of it in context.
You know what's funny about that is I just built a brand new presentation for Scaling New Heights next month. And I talk about creativity in the form of connection. And the example I actually learned from a book called Best Practices Are Stupid. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
No, but I like the idea of it.
Yeah, but he talks about the concept of, hey, if I say, here's a brick, right? Here's a brick. What can you do with a brick? And I just tell you that, I mean, your mind goes everywhere from, hurting somebody to standing on it, to grinding it down, to making sand, who knows, using it as weightlifting as another tool, a hammer. You can come up with an infinite amount of things, which, like you said, will paralyze a team though, because you don't know what the hell you're going to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then you combine that idea of a brick, and you go back to something Steve Jobs said about innovation begins when you can connect two things.
Yeah.
So you take the idea of a brick and say, what could you do to the human body? We'll just say with a brick.
But it's funny because
it just focuses your mind. Go ahead.
If it focuses, I think we went to the same place, because I thought, what could you do? What he said, combine two things. What could you do with a brick and that knucklehead? Total clarity.
There you go.
Total clarity right there.
It's exactly right. So you as a leader, you the one running your business, that's how you spark innovation. What can you do if I give you this to do that? Right. And it just opens up your mind, but a focused way, right? A focused, very connected way.
Yeah, because you're solving a problem. If it's almost like if you have the tool or the answer, the whatever, the object, and there's no problem to solve, it's like, who cares? It just doesn't go anywhere. You need that problem to solve. You need that context there. I like the idea of the brick belted on, popping off someone's head.
So if you come to Scaling New Heights, you're going to hear the whole story. What I mean,
I would love to, but they still haven't opened the border. We're still locked down here. It's ridiculous, but it's someday it will be open again. So.
All right, so I hope it's open by November, because I'm supposed to go to a thing called SAS North, and it's in Ottawa.
Oh, okay. I've been seeing, honestly, I've got emails and I've been seeing it, but it's hard to say. And because we're actually in a little bit of rough shape here. So right before I came down, I saw that there's a bunch of closures happening again. And but I'm hoping to be down in Arizona by November. So and maybe hopefully out your way at some point. So we'll see what happens. This is dragging on a long time.
Hey, something we didn't mention today, and I was surprised it never came up. We never talked about your gut.
About which?
About your gut instinct, you feeling the way things feel, you make decisions based on, I think it just feels good. It feels bad or feels good.
Yeah.
That never came up, right? And I don't know if it should
No.
or shouldn't,
I,
because
I it's as soon as you said my gut, I thought, you see my COVID weight. It's like hanging over my belt here. That's what I literally was saying. You want to talk about your gut? I'm like, was that showing up on camera? Oh, that's not
that's
good.
why I keep the camera right here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It is interesting because your gut still has a role, but I think you have to feed it. You have to feed that information. And where I think that what your gut comes in is at times when I'll say it like this: there's times when you can outthink yourself. And what your gut can do is it's like your subconscious going, you're thinking yourself. Like I've thought this. How many times have you thought this with you're watching the football game or the hockey game or whatever? You're like, yeah, coach is out thinking himself, and that is not going to go well. And it's like they've gotten their own head, and they're like, why would you put them on the ice? Like that is not. And then it happens. You're like, what do you do? Because they outthought themselves. They had gone so far down a path and spun. It's like at some point you actually got to, when your gut's telling you something, I think you sort of have to listen to it and go, it's my subconscious telling me something there.
Yeah.
And I need to think about that. And it's funny because as an entrepreneur, it's funny how oftentimes you get the sleepless nights. And I think what it is there's information coming at you and suddenly your gut goes, oh, wait a minute. This is not adding up or whatever. And that's where you start going, oh, I got to take a look at that.
Yeah, but your gut to me is like just a collection of your experience. It's like, when you put your hand on the stove the first time and it burns it, I'm not doing that again. That's your experience, right? And you start to learn, we shouldn't do that because I know where that's going.
Yeah.
It's
because
yeah,
like it feels like if you say it's a gut instinct or whatever, it feels like the term feels sort of almost random or like by accident or something like that. And no, it isn't. It's exactly what you said. I think that's a great example. It's that collective experience that, again, it's more maybe subconscious until you make it like a conscious sort of action. But that's, I think, at times where you really have to trust your gut because you've learned from this information. It's not based on nothing. Right. It's not something flighty. There's information that has led to that, right?
That's right. Yeah, you might not be able to recall it instantly, but there's something there, right?
Yep.
You just know, and based on your experience. Now, you said something, and I'm like, oh my God, I just saw the border between the U.S. and Canada, which was, you said, you're talking about a coach. I went to the gridiron, you went to the rink. In my mind,
yeah,
right? You were thinking hockey. I was thinking football. I'm like, oh, there it is. There's the difference in U.S. Canada right there.
And I will yell at the screen for either reason. But being in Canada, hockey is absolutely ingrained. And I'll tell you, it's total side note here. It's really kind of funny because I watch. I've been to some rinks in the U.S. and watched NHL games in the U.S. And it's what I find really fascinating is it's really quite different. And I think it's because I've grown up and no, I have to qualify this. I definitely have to qualify this. Like, this is not some really like hockey, like this is not Boston, Philly sort of thing. But I've been down to some of the southern states and watched, San Jose and Phoenix. Have been there a billion times. And what I find really funny is there's times I'm watching the game and you're sitting there and all of a sudden you go, oh, and I'm the only one. And then there's this like 1, 2, 3, oh, and I'm like, did you not see that? Like it's right there. Could you not see that happening? But I think at times when I'm like watching football, I'm a step behind, especially a friend of mine that played college ball. He's always 10 steps ahead of me He'll start like complaining about a broken play before the play's broken. And I'm like, I didn't see that. He's like, yeah, they had the wrong people. Like they did not have this. They're like, oh, okay. I'm 5 steps behind that. So it's, I guess I jumped to hockey because I'm, very, just so much more comfortable with it. So.
Yeah, so funny. All right, so today's episode was about planning is everything, but the plan is nothing. And what I think I learned here was, hey, listen, I mean, you've got to be able to set some direction. You with your team, with yourself, with your vision, you've got to set some direction. But I think you can get too detailed and get stuck or get or just lose focus on what you're really trying to do. So I think agility is what came out of this. I mean, what'd you learn today? Anything?
Yeah, like a plan is incredibly important, but you can't be too attached to it. You have to be flexible and open to shift from that plan, no matter how detailed and how much time you put in. Be flexible. And like we just talked about a little while ago, the role of your gut. There's times where you trust your gut because it likely is based on data and past experience.
Yeah, very cool. Hey, Blaine Birch, I'm Mike Mylan. And if you haven't had the opportunity to see us on YouTube, go to YouTube and check us out. And believe it or not, on YouTube, what you can do is leave a comment. And the comment I'm hoping to see is, what should we be talking about? What's going to help you the most? Because we want to talk about that, right? We want to be able to put topics in front of all of us that we can kind of explore. We can learn from each other. And, Blaine, you got something to add to that?
No, these have been so much fun, and I would love to hear from you guys, and tell us what you want us to talk about. We have no shortage of topics, but I would love to hear from you guys and see what you guys are interested in us chatting about.
Yeah, and with the onslaught of craft beer, we won't run out of beer either.
Not at all. I have to make sure that I've got a local. I'm starting to feel like a little guilty because you keep bringing in the Texans, and I'm like, here's someone from not Alberta. I like feel a little guilty about that. But anyway, I'll find my way.
Oh, I'm going to run out of Texas beer, I'm sure, and I'm going to have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Hey, again, nobody told me, and at this point, nobody told me that planning was everything, but the plan is nothing. Blaine, good to see you.
You too, man. It was a great conversation. See you again next week.
Right on.